Forced to marry a stranger, the CEO never expected his wedding night would change his heart. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let us return to our main character. The city skyline glittered against the night, all glass and steel and distance. Inside a penthouse that smelled faintly of leather and bourbon, Ethan Cole, the 32-year-old CEO of Cole Financial, stood before a mirror. His tuxedo fit perfectly, but the reflection staring back at him looked more like a prisoner than a groom. Tomorrow he would marry a woman he had never met. Not for love, not for choice, but because the empire his late father built was falling apart, and this marriage was the price of survival. On his desk lay a single piece of paper, a marriage contract with signatures waiting at the bottom. Next to it, a silver-framed photo of his father smiling the way only old photographs could. Ethan's jaw tightened. "You built this empire on pride, Dad," he muttered under his breath, "and now I am selling my freedom to keep it alive." Downstairs, the city hummed like a restless animal. Somewhere across town, his bride-to-be Lila Bennett was being fitted into a wedding dress she had not chosen either. Her family's company had collapsed under debt, and her father had made a desperate deal his daughter's hand for a financial rescue. Two strangers, two broken families, one contract. Ethan picked up his glass, letting the amber light from the city refract through it. The liquor burned his throat as he swallowed, but the silence afterward burned even deeper. His assistant had called earlier to confirm the ceremony time: 10 in the morning, St. Augustine Chapel, private event, no press. It was supposed to look elegant, controlled. But inside, nothing felt under control. He looked down at the line where his signature would go. The ink pen beside it gleamed under the soft light. Just a few strokes and his life would be sealed inside a deal he never wanted. He could almost hear his father's voice in his head. "A Cole never shows weakness." Ethan's phone buzzed. A message from the board chairman: "Do not forget what is at stake. The investors expect a husband tomorrow." He tossed the phone onto the table, exhaling sharply. "Right," he whispered. "A husband, not a man, not a human being." Outside, thunder rolled somewhere over the Hudson River. He walked toward the window, staring out over the rain-slick city. Below, headlights glided along the wet streets like tiny promises that never lasted. And for the first time in years, Ethan wondered what it might feel like to marry for something other than duty. The thought vanished as quickly as it came. The next day was already written, just like the contract on his desk. He closed the pen, signed his name, and set it down with finality. The ink shimmered black and permanent. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Ethan Cole would become a husband by force, and a stranger named Lila Bennett would become his wife. What neither of them knew was that one night in the quiet that followed the vows, everything they thought they knew about love would begin to change. Morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of St. Augustine Chapel, painting the marble aisle in soft gold. The air smelled faintly of lilies and polished wood. Guests filled the pews, murmuring quietly, waiting for a ceremony that none of them truly understood. To them, it looked like a society, wedding powerful families, merging fortunes. But to Ethan Cole, it felt like a transaction, not a union. He stood near the altar, the black tie tight around his throat like a leash. The contract he had signed the night before was still fresh in his mind, every clause etched behind his eyelids. 1 year of marriage to secure a merger. 1 year to protect his father's legacy. His assistant whispered, "Sir, she is here," and Ethan straightened his shoulders, his face unreadable. The chapel doors opened with a low creak. A hush fell over the crowd. Lila Bennett appeared at the entrance, her veil cascading like morning fog. She looked young, too young for the weight that had been placed on her shoulders. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the bouquet, but her chin was lifted high, her eyes clear. She had agreed to this marriage not for fame or wealth, but for something far more fragile: her father's survival. Lila's father, Harold Bennett, sat in the front pew, a frail man with tired eyes and a handkerchief pressed to his lips. His company had been drowning for years, and the Cole partnership was the only thing keeping it afloat. To save his life's work, he had offered his daughter's future. As the music swelled, Lila began her walk down the aisle. Her heart pounded in her chest, each step echoing like a countdown. She had not even seen Ethan's face until now, and when she did, her breath caught. He looked distant, his features carved in calm precision, but there was something behind his eyes, a kind of quiet exhaustion that mirrored her own. When she reached the altar, Ethan extended his hand politely. His palm was cold. She placed hers in his, forcing a faint smile. The priest began the vows, his voice steady and solemn. "Do you, Ethan Cole, take this woman I do?" The words left Ethan's mouth like a reflex. "Do you, Lila Bennett, take this man?" Lila hesitated. For a heartbeat she thought about the life she was giving up, the students she taught, the apartment filled with sunlight and piano music, the freedom to choose love on her own terms. Then she saw her father's shaking shoulders in the front row. "I do," she said softly. Applause rippled through the pews as the priest announced them husband and wife. Cameras flashed, a few investors nodded in satisfaction. The photographer called for them to face each other to smile. Ethan's expression softened just enough for the lenses. Lila did her best to follow. Outside the chapel, rain began to fall, fine and steady, as if the city itself understood the weight of what had just been sealed. The newlyweds were ushered into a sleek black car waiting at the curb. Inside, silence filled the space between them. Lila turned toward the window, watching raindrops race down the glass. "I suppose congratulations are in order," she said, her tone polite but detached. Ethan adjusted his cufflinks. "It seems so. Was this as strange for you as it was for me?" she asked quietly. He looked at her, then studying her face, soft features, cautious eyes, a steadiness he did not expect. "Strange is one word for it," he said. "Necessary might be another." Lila nodded, once her fingers tracing the edge of her bouquet. "Necessary," she repeated almost to herself. "I used to believe marriages were supposed to start with love." Ethan gave a faint, humorless smile. "Love is expensive. Contracts are cheaper." She turned away, and for a while they rode in silence through the city streets. Outside the car window, people hurried under umbrellas, living ordinary lives, free to choose who they cared about. The thought stung more than she wanted to admit. The car stopped at the Cole estate, a mansion that looked more like a museum than a home. Marble pillars, long corridors, and portraits of serious men staring down from the walls. Ethan led her inside, his steps measured. A housekeeper appeared, bowing slightly. "Welcome, Mrs. Cole," she said. The words made Lila flinch. "Mrs. Cole." It felt foreign, almost stolen. "This way," Ethan said, gesturing toward the grand staircase. "Your room is on the east side. Mine is opposite. It will be easier for the staff to maintain appearances that way." "Appearances," Lila echoed. "Of course." He paused halfway up the stairs. "There are a few ground rules," he said, turning back toward her. "We keep this marriage professional. No interference in business. No media statements. We will attend events together when required, and after 1 year the agreement ends." Lila met his eyes, her voice calm. "Understood. But may I add one rule?" His brow lifted slightly. "Go ahead." "No cruelty," she said. "We may be strangers, but that does not mean we have to be unkind." Ethan studied her for a moment, something unreadable flickering across his expression. Then he gave a slow nod. "Agreed." She continued up the stairs, her gown brushing against the polished wood, leaving a faint trail of white petals behind. Ethan watched her go, a strange unease forming in his chest. He told himself it was nothing, just the weight of duty settling in. But as thunder rumbled in the distance and the storm rolled closer, he could not shake the feeling that this stranger, this woman he had been forced to marry, might one day change far more than his company's fate. She might change him. The next morning broke gray and heavy over the Cole estate. Rain still clung to the windows, streaking down the glass in thin silver lines. The storm had not yet passed, and neither had the silence between Ethan and Lila. She woke early, disoriented for a moment by the luxury around her. The room was twice the size of her entire apartment back in the city. Cream curtains, soft carpet, a vanity carved from oak, everything looked untouched, lifeless, as if no one had ever really lived here. On the dresser sat a single white envelope with her name written in a careful masculine hand. Lila opened it. Inside was a copy of the marriage contract she had signed 2 days before. Underneath Ethan's signature were the terms in crisp black ink, 5 rules to define a loveless marriage. Rule 1. We respect each other's space. Rule 2. We appear together at public functions. Rule 3. No personal interference in business affairs. Rule 4. No press statements or emotional displays. Rule 5. The contract ends in 1 year. Lila stared at the paper for a long time. She had agreed to these rules willingly, but seeing them again in his handwriting felt like a quiet reminder that she was living on borrowed time. She folded the letter back into the envelope and placed it inside the nightstand drawer. Downstairs, Ethan was already in the dining room, dressed in a dark suit, his attention buried in the morning financial reports. The table between them could have seated 12 people, but today it felt like an ocean. "Good morning," she said, her tone polite but cool. He looked up briefly. "Morning. Did you sleep well?" "Well enough." She sat opposite him, careful not to disturb his papers. A maid poured her coffee. The quiet between them stretched thin. After a few moments, Lila spoke again. "I read the contract." Ethan glanced at her, the faintest trace of a smile touching his lips. "You make it sound like a novel." "In a way it is," she replied. "Except this one does not have a happy ending." He folded the paper in front of him, setting it aside. "That depends on how you define happy." "I define it as free," she said softly. He leaned back in his chair, eyes steady on hers. "Freedom has a price. You and I both know that." For a second neither spoke. Then Lila stood, her movements graceful but deliberate. "You may have bought a contract, Mr. Cole," she said quietly, "but you did not buy a ghost. I will not disappear just because you want me invisible." Ethan's expression shifted slightly, not anger, not amusement, something closer to curiosity. "Noted," he said. "You are free to live here as you wish, within reason. I will hold you to that." That evening, while Ethan worked late in his study, Lila explored the mansion. Every hallway felt colder than the last. The walls were lined with portraits of the Cole family, men in suits, women in pearls, all looking stern, untouchable. She stopped at one painting of a younger Ethan with his father, both smiling in front of the company's first office. His father's hand rested proudly on his son's shoulder. "Did you know him well?" came Ethan's voice from behind her. She turned, startled, to find him standing at the end of the corridor. "Only from what I have read," she said. "Your father built quite an empire." Ethan's gaze softened just slightly. "He did, and he died protecting it. And now you are doing the same," she said, "at the cost of your own life." His jaw tightened. "You speak as if you know me." "I do not," she said quietly, "but I know the look of someone who stopped living a long time ago." The silence between them grew heavy again. Finally he said, "You should get some rest. Tomorrow we have a business luncheon. You will need to attend as my wife." "As your wife," she repeated, tasting the words like something foreign. "Yes," he said almost gently, "appearances matter." That night, as she lay in bed, Lila could still hear the rain outside tapping against the window like a heartbeat. The mansion felt too quiet, too large for two strangers. She turned to the empty space beside her and whispered to herself, 1 year. I can survive 1 year. Across the hall, Ethan stood by his own window, staring into the darkness. The papers on his desk were untouched, his mind elsewhere. He thought about the look in Lila's eyes when she spoke of freedom, how her voice did not tremble once. There was strength there, quiet, inconvenient, unforgettable. He closed the folder on the merger deal and exhaled slowly. The storm outside began to fade, but inside him something had only just begun to stir. By the end of the first week, the mansion had settled into an uneasy rhythm. Ethan buried himself in work, leaving before sunrise and returning long after midnight. Lila filled the empty hours with small acts of rebellion, watering the garden that no one tended, opening curtains that had been closed for years, and playing the piano in the east parlor where sound carried through the halls. The melody she played most often was soft, unfinished, something she called glass hearts. The housekeepers began to whisper that the new Mrs. Cole had brought light into the place. Ethan would not have agreed, but even he could not ignore how different the estate felt when he came home. The faint scent of jasmine tea lingered in the air. The windows gleamed. For the first time in years, he noticed laughter echoing faintly from the servants' quarters. One evening, as he entered the foyer, the sound of the piano stopped him. The melody was haunting, delicate, the kind that reached inside the chest and stayed there. He followed it to the parlor doorway. Lila sat at the piano, her back straight, her fingers moving gracefully across the keys. She had changed from her formal dresses into a simple cream sweater, her hair tied loosely at her neck. She looked up when she sensed his presence. "I hope you do not mind," she said softly. The piano looked lonely. "It has been silent for years," Ethan replied, stepping closer. My mother used to play before she passed. Lila's hands paused on the keys. Then I am sorry if it brought back difficult memories. He shook his head. No. It is strange, but I had forgotten what the house sounded like when someone was living in it. There was a small silence, comfortable for once. Lila gestured toward the empty seat beside her. Do you play? Ethan gave a quiet laugh. I used to. I was terrible. Everyone starts terrible, she said, smiling faintly. That is the point of practice. He studied her for a moment, caught off guard by how easily she spoke to him now. What is the song called? Glass Hearts, she said. It is not finished yet. Maybe it never will be. He tilted his head. Why that name? Because glass looks strong until you touch it the wrong way, she answered. Then it shatters. Ethan said nothing. Something in her words struck closer than he expected. The silence between them deepened, not uncomfortable this time, but fragile like the song itself. The next morning his assistant arranged for a stylist to visit. Lila was to attend a company gala that weekend as part of her duties. The staff buzzed with excitement, bringing dresses, shoes, and jewelry. Lila sat through it all politely, though the weight of pretense pressed against her chest. When she entered the living room that evening to show Ethan the chosen gown, he looked up from his laptop. The dark navy dress caught the light, subtle but elegant. It suits you, he said after a pause. Thank you, she replied. I will try not to embarrass you. He closed the laptop. You will not. But remember, people there will talk. Smile when you must, say little when you can. The less they know, the safer you are. Safe from what? She asked quietly. From everyone who wants something, he said. The night of the gala arrived quickly. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and champagne laughter. Lila stood beside Ethan as cameras flashed, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She had rehearsed the smile, the posture, even the tilt of her head. To anyone watching, they looked like the perfect couple. A journalist approached. Mr. Cole, how did you and your wife meet? Ethan hesitated. Lila spoke before he could answer. He spilled coffee on me, she said with a bright smile. And then he apologized by buying the entire cafe. Laughter erupted around them. Ethan turned toward her, surprised. For the first time, he saw not the woman trapped by circumstance, but someone capable of grace under fire. You are quick, he murmured. Occupational hazard, she replied. I used to teach children. They can sense when you are afraid. The evening continued, filled with toasts and introductions. Ethan watched her navigate the crowd with quiet dignity. When the orchestra began to play, someone asked for the newlyweds to dance. Lila froze for a moment, then placed her hand in his. As they moved across the floor, her steps tentative at first. Ethan leaned closer and whispered, You are doing fine. I am counting every step, she whispered back. That is what I do every day, he said. Only my steps are in millions of dollars. She laughed softly, and for the first time he smiled, not the public smile, but a real one. Around them the music swelled, the lights shimmered, and the walls Ethan had built so carefully began to show their first cracks. When the dance ended, he looked at her and said quietly, You surprised me tonight. Lila met his gaze without fear. Good, she said. Maybe that means there is still something in this marriage that cannot be written into a contract. He did not answer, but as they left the ballroom together, Ethan realized that somewhere between the signatures and the silence, this arrangement was beginning to feel dangerously real. The night after the gala, the Cole mansion glowed faintly with the reflection of city lights. Lila sat on the balcony wrapped in a shawl, replaying the evening in her mind. The applause, the laughter, the cameras, it had all looked perfect. Yet beneath the sparkle she could still feel the truth. Their smiles had been rehearsed, their closeness part of the contract. Still, for a few fleeting moments on the dance floor, it had felt real. Ethan appeared at the balcony doorway, his tie loosened his posture, tired but softer than usual. You handled yourself well tonight, he said quietly. Thank you, Lila replied, keeping her eyes on the skyline. Did we convince them? He leaned on the railing beside her. More than enough. The investors were impressed. They think we are happy. Are you? She asked. The question caught him off guard. He looked at her profile in the silver moonlight. Happiness is not something I have thought about in a long time. Maybe you should, she said. You looked like you remembered how to breathe out there. He gave a quiet laugh, low and unexpected. Perhaps you are right. The air between them felt lighter for a moment, but it did not last. The next morning a scandal broke online. Someone had leaked a photograph of Ethan and Lila, leaving the gala with a headline that read, Marriage of convenience sources say the CEO's union is a business deal. Within hours the story spread. Stockholders demanded answers and reporters crowded the gates of the coal estate. Ethan slammed the newspaper onto his desk. "Who leaked this?" he demanded. His assistant stammered something about a rival company. Lila stood by the doorway, her hands clenched at her sides. "So they know," she said softly. Ethan looked up at her frustration shadowing his features. "They suspect." "There is a difference." "Not to them," she replied. "To them I am the girl who sold herself for a dress and a name." "That is not true," he said sharply. "But it is what they see," she answered. "And what do you see, Ethan? Am I just the woman who signed your contract?" He stepped closer, his voice low but steady. "I see the woman who walked into a room full of sharks and smiled like she owned the ocean. That is what I see." The words stunned her into silence. For a moment neither moved. Then he turned away, pacing the room. "We will handle this. I will release a statement saying we are fine, that the rumors are false." Lila hesitated, then shook her head. "No. Let them believe what they want. Trying to explain will only feed them." "You do not understand how this world works," he said. "Then teach me," she said quietly. "But do not protect me like a liability." Her voice carried a strength that stopped him mid-sentence. He looked at her again, really looked, and realized that she was no longer afraid. That evening they attended a small charity dinner, an appearance they could not cancel. When a journalist cornered them with the same question, Ethan did not deflect or walk away. Instead, he reached for Lila's hand and said clearly, "This is my wife, not my deal." The room fell silent for a beat before the crowd broke into polite applause. Lila turned to him in shock. His grip on her hand was firm, steady, real. For the first time since their wedding, he had chosen to protect her publicly, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Later that night, when they returned home, Lila paused at the grand staircase. "You did not have to do that," she said softly. "I know," Ethan replied. "But I wanted to." She smiled faintly. "Careful, Mr. Cole. People might start thinking you have a heart." He looked at her for a long moment, and for once he did not hide the small smile tugging at his lips. "Maybe I am starting to wonder the same thing." The storm between them had not ended, but something had shifted. For the first time their marriage was no longer about survival. It was about choice. That night the city rain returned, whispering against the tall windows of the mansion. Ethan could not sleep. The statement he made at the charity dinner still echoed in his mind. "This is my wife, not my deal." It had not been part of any script or strategy. The words had come from somewhere he had not visited in years, somewhere real. He left his room and walked down the quiet corridor. A faint light glowed under the door of the music room. He paused, listening. Lila was playing again. The same song as before, but slower this time, softer, like a heartbeat that had learned to rest. He pushed the door open gently. Lila sat at the piano, her bare feet tucked under her chair, her hair loose over her shoulders. She looked up, but did not stop playing. "Could not sleep?" she asked. "Not really," he said, stepping closer. "You play differently tonight." She smiled faintly. "I was thinking about the way people break and sometimes rebuild." Ethan leaned against the piano, watching her fingers move across the keys. "And which one are you doing now?" "Maybe both," she said. "Maybe that is what it means to survive." He nodded slowly, the quiet wrapping around them. "Your music makes this house feel alive," he said. "It used to sound like a tomb." Lila tilted her head, her voice gentle. Then maybe it was waiting for someone to listen again. He looked at her, then really looked. The woman he had married out of duty no longer seemed like a stranger. There was strength in her calm and warmth in the way she filled the silence without forcing it. "I do not know why I keep finding myself here," he said, his voice low. "Maybe you are tired of being alone," she replied. He hesitated, then asked quietly, "Do you regret it? This marriage?" She stopped playing. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But not for the reasons you think. I regret the walls we built. I regret pretending that kindness needs permission." Ethan's throat tightened. "You do not owe me kindness." "I know," she said softly. "That is why it matters." For a long moment neither spoke. The rain outside softened the air thick with something unspoken. Ethan finally said, "The contract ends in 11 months. "I know," she replied. "But time is not the only thing that ends." He frowned slightly. What do you mean? Lila stood, closing the piano lid with a quiet thud. Sometimes the version of yourself that signed a contract does not exist anymore. She turned to leave, but Ethan caught her wrist gently. Lila, he said. Stay. She froze, her heart pounding. When she looked at him, there was no distance left between them, just two people trying to remember what it meant to trust. I do not want to be another line on a contract, she said. Neither do I, he answered. The rain outside stopped, completely replaced by the stillness of a city holding its breath. Lila exhaled slowly and sat beside him again. Neither of them spoke, but the silence was different now, no longer cold, no longer empty. Later, when she stood to leave, he said quietly, "Good night, Mrs. Cole." She turned at the doorway, her expression soft. "Good night, Ethan." After she left, he remained there in the dim light, staring at the piano lid that still carried the warmth of her touch. For the first time, Ethan Cole, the man who lived by rules and numbers, began to understand that the most fragile things, trust, kindness, and love, were also the ones worth fighting for. He looked toward the empty hallway where she had gone and whispered, "Maybe glass hearts do not just break. Maybe they reflect light too." Outside, dawn began to edge through the clouds, quiet and full of promise. The next morning, sunlight spilled gently through the wide windows of the study. For the first time in weeks, the house felt calm. Ethan found himself waiting for the sound of the piano, but it never came. When he asked the maid, she said Lila had gone out early for errands, something about a charity project at the community center. Hours passed. Ethan buried himself in work, but his concentration slipped each time he glanced toward the empty doorway. He told himself it was nothing, just habit. Yet beneath that logic, unease began to grow. By late afternoon, his assistant rushed in, a tablet in hand. "Sir, you should see this." On the screen, a breaking headline glared in bold letters. "The Cole marriage scandal deepens. Insider claims the bride was paid to play the perfect wife." Ethan's pulse quickened. Beneath the headline were photos: Lila at the community center handing food to children, with captions twisting her actions into a publicity stunt. "Who leaked this?" he demanded. His assistant hesitated. "It appears to be a board member from Bennett Holdings, her father's company. They are pushing for your divorce to void the merger clause." The words hit like a blow. Ethan grabbed his coat and left without another word. He found Lila outside the community center, standing beside a line of volunteers. The afternoon wind tossed strands of her hair across her face. She looked tired but steady, the same quiet dignity that had drawn him before. When she saw him, her expression faltered. "You saw it, did you not?" "I did," he said, voice low but controlled. "And I know it was not you." Her shoulders dropped with relief. "They used my father's name to justify it. He does not even know." Ethan stepped closer. "The board is trying to destroy the deal. If they succeed, you lose your father's company and I lose mine." "Then what do we do?" she asked. He met her eyes. "We stand together. No statements, no hiding. They want a scandal, they will get a partnership instead." That evening they appeared at a shareholders' meeting. Cameras flashed as they entered hand in hand. Lila wore a simple navy dress, nothing extravagant, but her calm presence silenced the crowd. Ethan spoke first, his voice clear. "My marriage is not a contract, it is a promise. Anyone who attacks my wife attacks me." The room buzzed with whispers. A few board members shifted uneasily. Lila squeezed his hand, once small, firm grounding. When it was her turn, she said, "I may not understand business, but I understand honesty. You cannot build a company on lies and expect it to stand." Her words struck deeper than any strategy Ethan had ever planned. When the meeting ended, reporters swarmed them outside, but he shielded her with his arm, guiding her to the car. As the doors closed, she whispered, "You did not have to defend me like that." "Yes, I did," he replied, "because for the first time I wanted to." The city lights flickered through the car window, reflecting in her eyes like tiny fires. Neither of them spoke again, but both knew that something fundamental had changed. The walls around Ethan's heart were no longer solid steel. They had begun to crack, and through those cracks light was finally finding its way in. 2 weeks later, the noise around the scandal began to fade. The board dropped their demands, investors calmed, and for the first time the Cole name stood stronger than before. Yet inside the mansion, the shift between Ethan and Lila felt deeper than anything the public could see. She spent more time in the music room, composing quietly at the piano. Ethan often found himself listening from the doorway without speaking, as if her music could explain emotions he had never learned to name. One evening, She left a sheet of handwritten notes on the piano. At the top, in careful script, she had written glass hearts for those who learned to feel again. Ethan picked it up later, tracing the words with his thumb. The melody echoed in his mind long after the notes had ended. The next morning, Lila woke to find a letter slid under her door. It was brief, written in Ethan's precise handwriting. "I am done fighting ghosts. Tonight, meet me on the rooftop at 8. E." At sunset, she climbed the narrow stairs to the rooftop terrace. The sky was streaked with gold and rose the city glowing below. Ethan stood by the railing, the wind tugging at his coat. When he turned, his expression was unguarded, softer than she had ever seen. "I have been thinking about that song of yours," he said. "Glass hearts." Lila nodded slowly. "It is about fragility, about how we protect ourselves until someone proves they will not break us." Ethan stepped closer. "Then maybe it is time I stop hiding behind contracts and start proving something real." He handed her a folded envelope. Inside was the annulment clause from their marriage contract, unsigned, untouched. "This was supposed to free us after a year," he said. "But if I sign it now, I lose more than I ever feared losing before." Her eyes met his, shining with quiet disbelief. "Why are you giving it to me?" "Because I want you to choose," he said. "Stay not because you must, but because you want to." The evening wind carried their silence heavy with meaning. Lila looked down at the paper, then back at him. "You once said freedom has a price," she whispered. "Maybe love does too." He reached out, his voice steady. "Then let me be the one who pays it." The city lights flickered on around them as she folded the paper and placed it against his chest. "Not tonight," she said softly. "Tonight we just breathe." And for the first time, Ethan Cole did. A year passed quietly and steadily. The contract that had once defined their marriage gathered dust in a locked drawer forgotten. The Cole estate no longer felt like a monument, but a home. The staff no longer whispered about the strange arrangement. They spoke instead about laughter that now filled the halls, about the piano that played at dusk, and about how the man once called cold as marble had learned to smile. On a warm spring evening, the mansion hosted a charity gala to fund music programs for underprivileged children. The event was Lila's idea, and Ethan had supported it without hesitation. The main hall shimmered with soft lights and the faint scent of garden roses. Guests filled the space, but all eyes turned to the small stage, where a grand piano waited under the glow of a single spotlight. Lila stepped forward in a simple white dress, her composure calm yet glowing. She sat at the piano, her fingers finding the keys with familiar ease. The melody of Glass Hearts flowed into the room, complete at last. Every note carried the story of two strangers who had signed a contract and found something that could never be written into paper. When the final chord faded, applause filled the hall. Ethan rose from the front row and walked toward her. In his hand was no contract, no pen, only a small velvet box. The crowd fell silent as he stood beside her. "I once thought love was a risk I could not afford," he said, his voice steady, but thick with emotion. "Then you proved that the only real risk was never trying." He opened the box, revealing a simple gold ring. No rules, no clauses, just a promise. Lila's eyes shimmered with tears. "Are you sure?" "I have never been more sure of anything," he said. She smiled, nodding through her tears. "Then yes." Applause rose again, louder this time, as Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger. Later, under the same rooftop sky where they had once faced their fears, they stood hand in hand. The city stretched endlessly below, full of noise and light. Lila leaned her head against his shoulder. "Do you ever think about the night we signed that contract?" she asked. "Every day," he said. "It was the night I met the woman who turned an agreement into forever." And as the wind carried her laughter into the quiet, Ethan Cole finally understood what love truly meant, not a deal to be honored, but a promise to be lived.